Actually, before we start the scripture, I'll give about 5 minutes of filler. I got a chance to speak at a Spanish church in Lawrence, and I said God has a sense of humor because they had somebody like me with a Portuguese last name speak at a church with people that are all Spanish. And my whole life I've had to explain to people that my name is Gonzalez, not Gonzalez. And despite telling them that and spelling it for them, my name is usually spelled Gonzalez. And even my study Bible has that on it. And I was thinking about when I talk to these people that it's an old expression that Spanish people say about Portuguese people, pocos y locos. There's just a few of them and they're crazy. But that wouldn't apply to me. Or maybe it would. So my grandfather actually, and this has nothing to do with preaching, but my grandfather told me some great things when I was a kid. And somehow I decided to tell a few little anecdotes about him. He was only about 5'4". He was a small man. He was born in Madeira, which was a small island in Portugal. And it's kind of a funny thing, but isn't it true that a lot of us look up to grandparents and things, and they just often seem to be shorter than us? And I'm no tall person. But, our grandparents, especially if they were from other islands and stuff. Yes, I'm picking up my pants because I forgot my belt. And it's what happens when you listen to your grandfather who used to eat healthy all the time, as I've been doing. One of the things he used to do that was funny is when I saw him is he only ate healthy things, which as McDonald's and things were just getting going when I was a kid, I used to be like, what are you eating? What is this granola stuff? Or he was 40 years ahead of everybody else. Or fruit or nuts. If he had a snack, it would be nuts. And he just had these healthy teeth. And, I'd look at him and I'd be like, what are you eating? And that's what he grew up eating. When you came from these islands and things, that's what they ate. They didn't eat processed foods and all this stuff. And I thought about it. He never told me how to eat. Although he did make me take honey once because I was sick, even though I didn't want to. And I thought about how kids will listen to what you say, but they will do what you do. And so we have kids here, and the thing is important that we teach them. But after we talk to them a whole bunch, they're just going to go run and do what we do. Okay? So it took me a long time to think about him and doing that. He also thought that my father was a farmer and actually we are going to preach, by the way, but I'm just letting everyone settle down. He thought that we were on a farm, even though we grew up in Andover, and we had 2 apple trees in the back. You know that apple trees, you often have to be in pairs because somehow they pollinate each other or something. I don't know how that works, but they do. The one's over here and one's over there, but they have to be close to each other. And he used to have me prune the apple trees. And I used to ask him, after I pruned a little bit, I think I'm done. And he made me take a basket like you'd picture putting a whole bunch of apples in, and take the basket and throw it up into the apple tree. If it got stuck in the apple tree, you weren't done pruning the apple tree. That was how you knew you were done pruning, is when it would just go down and fall up. All the branches that shot straight up, you needed to cut. I learned something about pruning then, and boy, when you prune till the basket doesn't get stuck up there, you prune a lot. And I think that says something about what God has to do in our lives, amen? The other thing is he was a frugal man. When I was a kid, I called him cheap by mistake once, and he said, son, I'm not cheap. I said, really? What's the deal with the fact that you use a disposable razor 25 times and then sharpen it and use it 20 more? He said, that's called frugal. One time I made the mistake of taking 2 paper towels. He got up from his seat so fast, made me split it in half and put the paper towel back on the roll. 40 years later, when I'm in the operating room and the nurses want to open up everything, I'm like, don't open that, I might not need it. You over there knows what I'm talking about. That comes from my grandfather. who grew up in the Depression and all that stuff. He taught me to enjoy nature, although he went around and picked out a bunch of wild blueberries from the camp in New Hampshire that we worked at, and we all ate them, but I don't like not blueberries, mushrooms, wild mushrooms. And everyone got sick but me because I didn't eat those wild mushrooms. So he actually taught me not to pick wild mushrooms. One of the last things he did is he started a small business, and he used his family as workers, and they worked out of the house. And we got some people that work out of their house in a family business, and we called it the shop because finally they got a building. But for years and years, it was just in the house that my grandfather did it with the kids. And your best workers will be your family. And when they got the shop, there was a guy next door to him that had a building that was very close to his property line. And many, many years ago, the man asked if he could have his customers park on my grandfather's land in, where AJ Motors is now, and Callahan's was next door. And my grandfather said to old man Callahan, sure, you can have your customers park on the side of my lot to go in and actually use your property. And as time went on, there were different people that came and went, and they suggested that you should be charging him to use your property for the parking and stuff. And he said, no, I shook his hand and I told him that he could use it. And as long as I'm alive, he can use that land for this, even though it's for commercial profit. Not that profit's not a dirty word here, but he basically adhered to a principle in the Old Testament that talks about not moving a boundary line. And when I read that when I was young, don't move a boundary line, I knew what it meant right away. And when he went, and he went the way of all people, my father adhered to that for as long as that building was there. The Callahan building ultimately burnt down. But my father would not charge from him because his father didn't do it. And now let's read from John 1:1. I think we're settled down. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Beginnings are hard. We're here. This is our first lesson. This is a beginning. But this beginning is a different beginning. Of course, this echoes back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But in this beginning right here, in the beginning was the Word, John is going back before the creation of the world. We'll see in John 1:3, when he speaks about the creation of the world, he's talking about the all-time beginning, the beginning of all beginnings. And another way to say this is, in the beginning, the Word was already existed. The Word was already there. So what we're really talking about is the beginning of time. If you can imagine this clock, and it had never ever moved, the hands on the clock, the seconds, and the Word comes, Jesus comes, and he flicks the clock. Or for those who are digitally minded, because nobody that's under 20 knows even how to read a clock, a stopwatch with a digital readout. And Jesus clicked the button, and the beginning happened. The beginning actually means the beginning of time. There was a time where there was no time. Don't ask me to explain that. But Jesus started time. What's the spiritual lesson of that? Well, each one of these I'm going to try to give you a spiritual lesson. We've only spoken about the word beginnings. The spiritual lesson that God gave to me was, he made time, he started time. He's in control of time. If you go outside and you have a watch, not these digital watches that are set by atomic clock somewhere, but in the old days when we had watches, and they could be really off, so that on the Blues Brothers they had to synchronize their watches to make sure that whatever they were doing back then. That's a vague reference to something that's not pertinent, so take that from the record. No, just leave it in there. But when people actually went outside, in the old days, they would sometimes have to look at the sun to determine what time it is. Well, can you imagine somebody foolish enough to look at the clock and try to adjust the sun? Say, my clock says 1 o'clock. The sun says 3 o'clock. Well, good luck trying to get the clock to go, the sun to go back to where your clock is. Now, this is a nonsensical story here, but don't we do that? Don't we try to adjust our time to God's time instead of us moving over and working according to God's time for things in our life? Usually, we're trying to rush God. Usually, we're trying to get ahead of God. Sometimes, we need the kick in the butt and we're behind God's time. But usually, we're trying to control the time. God won't adjust his timing to fit you. He created time. We're used to sequencing. Time is for sequencing. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. He knows and sees the end from the beginning. He lives outside of time. He is timeless. That is what eternity is. That is what heaven is. Heaven means eternity. There is no time in heaven. We will be there forever and ever and ever. How could that be? There is no time in heaven. I said this, eternity is youth without infancy or old age, life without birth or death. That's eternity. In the beginning, Jesus was alive. The Word was alive. We're going to talk about the Word in a minute, but you just have to understand what I'm talking about here of eternity. Really, it's hard because I'm speaking and time is going by and we're always mindful of time, and I haven't used up my time, but we're trying to get a sense of that there was a beginning of time before even anything was done, before heaven and earth were created. The Word already existed. The Word was already there. His time is not our time. One of the things I said is, if he made it and he made time, then time is good. And so if time is good, time is important. So you guys know I spend a lot of time talking about wasting your time. Now, I know that sounds funny. I spend a lot of time talking about wasting your time. But I do. I seem to, every time I get a chance to speak, want to speak a little bit about wasting time. And we've got some young parents here. I found this to be fascinating, that toddlers and TV or screen time, if you have a child that's under 4, the time that they should be spending doing anything with a screen on it works out to about 1 hour per day. Anything more than 1 hour a day that they're in front of a screen, this is what happens per extra hour. 7% drop in math participation. 7% drop in class participation, 6% drop in math scores, 10% increase in snacking. That means if a child has 1 more hour a day of TV, that's 7 more hours a week, that's 49% decline in math scores that will result from 2 hours a day of screen time instead of 1. You could say, how could that be? There's 24 hours in a day. Well, they're sleeping for 12, 13, 14 hours of them. So when you're giving 20% of their most awake time to things like this, that's going to be the effect. Now, I can't make this stuff up, but they had a 2-year-old that can use an iPad, certainly with a speed that I could not do. And they were bragging about it. It was on TV, and YouTube has 500,000 hits. You can check it out yourself. And the family's bragging, and the news people says he's going to get such a jump start in life from this. What did the kid ultimately go to? After he went through all these subcategories and windows, the kid ultimately went to this ebook that says, My Father and Me. My Father and Me. That was what it was, a game or something. My Father and Me. I was like, that is not your father and you sitting in front of an iPad. That is not my father and me. Time is important. He made it. One of the things that God spoke to me, I've repeated this last week and to a few people, but it's worth repeating for the record, is that when the devil can't get you into a besetting sin, what do I mean? He can't get you to trip up on the same sin. You sort of miss the big sins. One of the things he'll do is just try to waste your time doing stupid stuff. That's the next best thing that he'll do. So our time counts. You've got to do things his way, his time. It's good to brush your teeth. It's good to go to church. It's not good to brush your teeth at church at the same time, contrary to what multitaskers think. If he can get you to waste your time or that was a joke, or make poor use of your time, he doesn't care. He doesn't care if you're spending all day long drinking a beer, this is the devil, or you're spending all day long on Facebook. You're just wasting your time. He'd rather have you jump in a muddy pond, but if you just jump up and down in puddles all day, you'll get plenty wet. Just give it a little while. The more things change, the more things stay the same. You'll have to think about that later. I've only gotten through one word, beginning, so I better move on. I'm running out of time. I don't want to waste it. In the beginning was the Word. Beginning also means preeminent, first and foremost. Beginning means the most important thing in the Greek here. One of the things you have to understand, I'm going to bring this up later, is we're reading a translation. We're reading something that somebody translated. Now, having spoken in a Spanish church just 2 days ago with a great 18-year-old kid, but sometimes what he would say, I understand enough Spanish to know it wasn't exactly how I wanted it to be said. So whenever somebody translates the Bible, we lose a little bit. All translators are thieves. I'll give you a funny story. I used to have to get a translator when I was a resident because I was in Chinatown. And if you know anything about trying to understand elderly Chinese people, they're very stoic. So you try to look at their facial expression, and there'd be no expression. So they had this translator that would ask them, do you have belly pain? When did it begin? How long have you had it? What part of the belly? All this stuff. They'd go back and forth for 5 minutes, and then the translator would turn to me and go, no. No? No? Was something lost in translation? You guys just talked for 5 minutes. So, no. Okay. So we lose something when we try to translate. So beginning also means first and foremost, preeminent, ahead of the pack. In the beginning was the Word. The Word has always been first and foremost. Jesus has always been number one. The Word, of all the things I'm going to talk about today, this term, the Word, I have the most problem with. The translators have picked the best word that they think they can. The Greek word is logos. In the beginning was logos. Here's the thing about logos. Logos is something different in every language. If a missionary went to Asia and some parts of Asia a long time ago and said Jesus is the bread of life, they'd say, we don't have a word for bread, we don't know what bread is, and we don't care about bread because there's no wheat where we live. So they would immediately have to say, okay, I guess I could probably say Jesus is the rice of life. And if you're in Lowell, you'd have to say Jesus is the hamburger of life because that's what kids eat nowadays. But you understand what I'm saying, that there's a problem. Well, here's what I want you to understand. The word logos means word in Greek. It also means to gather your thoughts. It also means word in action. It means deed. It also means to put things together. It's the act of speaking and the thought before the speech and the thought after the speech. You know what logos really is? This is what God gave me. Logos is Jesus' name before he was born. That's how important logos is. Catch that. Just let that soak a little bit because that's like revelation to me. Logos is, Jesus Christ was not always called Jesus Christ. He was always Logos. He's always been the Son, as we'll see later, but he's always been Logos. So in the beginning was Logos, would be fine. And if you were in China, it might be in the beginning was Tao, or in the beginning, if you're Indian, was mantra, or whatever. You see what I'm saying? He is all, you say, well, you're saying he's mantra for them. No, he's more than all those things. We don't have a word for it. But if you want a word for it, logos, let it be his name, not some grammar thing. That's his name. Why is that his name? Well, Jehovah God says, I am was his name. Okay, see, so we're limited by these things, but I want you to understand that. If you're saying to me, what does the name mean? Well, the name itself is important, but what we're really talking about here is creation, deliverance, and revelation. That's what Logos is about. In the beginning, we're going to talk about creation and creation in our lives. We're going to talk about revelation, that he revealed who God is to all of us, and we're going to talk about deliverance. Isaiah 55, the word shall not return to me void, it shall come down, water the earth, come back. We're talking about the water cycle. We're talking about the word of God. No, we're talking about Jesus. He left heaven. He came down to earth. He was a man. He died on the cross for us. He rose again. He came back to heaven. That's the cycle that's being talked about in Isaiah 55. It was not in void. Psalm 107:20. God sent forth his word and healed them. There's all these different things, but he sent forth his word and healed them. What's he talking about? He's not what's he talking about. Who's he talking about? He's talking about Jesus, the word, Logos. He sent Jesus and healed them. Leave it untranslated the next time you talk about him to somebody who doesn't even know who Jesus is. Just say, I started following Logos. They'll be like, oh, okay, good to know. It means speaking to a conclusion. What's kind of cool is it also means to lay it to rest. There's so many things in this word. What do you mean lay it to rest? A conclusion, an argument. Enough said. Done. That's it. There's nothing more. When he speaks, it's done. It implies communication. Where there's Logos, there's communication. There's relationship. We're going to get to that in a little bit. There's communication. Words were crystallized into space, matter, and time. His voice is like no other. Listen for it. Musicians can recognize each other's, that they're musicians by hearing each other's voices. I can't because I'm not a musician. But my understanding is that. The word was with God. With God here means it was towards God, facing God, face to face, reciprocal, close. It's not just this four-letter conjunctive word. It has a sense of home and intimacy. That's what the word was with God means. Logos was with the Father, intimate. In the beginning, done. And then it says, and the word was God. Now, we know lots of people that want to make him a little less than God. They want to make him a little angel like Jehovah's Witnesses or Islam. He's a great prophet. Once you make him a little bit less than God, he goes all the way down the slippery slope, and before long you're saying he's a good person and maybe we should take his advice. It says here, the word was God. In the beginning, already God. Bam, done. Before anything happened, before time, he was God. That's a relief to me. What's the spiritual lesson? He's bigger than our problems. He's not even bigger than this universe. He's way bigger than the universe. He's way bigger than our problems. He can handle it. Jesus is God. That's the lesson I take from that. What's the other lesson? If he's God, not only can he handle it, he's worthy to be worshipped. You can worship him. You can worship the one who made you. The other thing is that it says he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. I've told this story twice before. Forgive me for repeating myself, but I just like it too much. The scientist comes up to God and says, I can make man. Right? So he gets a pile of dirt and starts to work, and God says, hold on. The man says, what? The scientist says, what? And God says, get your own dirt. God made the universe out of nothing. He made the universe out of nothing. That doesn't mean he had some space. He had a few carbon fibers here. He had a little bit of air and time here. He had no space, no time, no energy, no matter, nothing. He made the universe with that. You show me somebody who can make something out of nothing, and I will worship them. And I will not worship anybody but that. Something out of nothing. You can say, what about the Big Bang? What about this? My Bible doesn't tell me how he made it or when he made it. It told me why he made it and who made it. So I don't care if the universe is 38 billion light years long. When God said, Logos, before the L hit the 38 billion cosmic horizon, end of the universe, the S was not yet out of his mouth. And if you want a Big Bang, that was the Big Bang. Jesus! Bang! Everything happened. But he's not your God's breath. He is God. He's not some force. He was there. Bam! Jesus. I'm trying to explain it. It's so important, if you forget everything else, that God gave me this. God isn't a painter that takes an empty canvas with some paint and makes a beautiful picture. That's what we do. God isn't that. What God does, okay, what God does when he makes everything, what he does, he has no canvas, he has no paint, he has no brushes, he has no landscape to look at, he has nothing, and he makes everything beautiful. That's what I'm talking about. Later on, we're going to learn about Logos, that Logos is the Son of God, and that the Logos is Jesus. But I wanted to introduce everybody on the first week, in the beginning of Jesus' way, and this is the first week of Jesus' way. For those who are new, which we've got quite a few people, what does Jesus' way mean? Why would you name a church Jesus' way? Jesus' way means this is the path to the Father, to Father God. That's what Jesus' way means. We're on the same path as Jesus to the Father. If you don't know what path you're on in your life, there was somebody that mocked a preacher once and said, hey, preacher, tell me where I said this last week too. Tell me where the road to hell is. And the preacher said, you're on it. If you don't want to be on the road to hell, you can be on Jesus' way. It's a way that's the road to heaven. And he's on it, and we're on it who follow him. And who we're following is not some good teacher. He's a lot more than that. We're following the one who made heaven and earth, who came down to earth, who came back to heaven, who left his spirit for us to be here. What's the spiritual lesson about somebody who can make something out of nothing? This is the last thing for a lesson. What's the spiritual lesson of somebody who can make something out of nothing? I'll tell you. This is it. I'm shutting this off. The spiritual lesson is, close your eyes for a second. We're going to worship. We've got a half an hour left. What do you see? What do you see? Nothing, right? When your eyes are closed, you see nothing. Let me tell you what you're looking at. You're looking at yourself. You're looking at your life without Jesus. Open your eyes for a second. You see all this? That's your life with Jesus. Space, time, matter, colors, beauty, people, relationships, communication. Close your eyes again. That's darkness. That's your life without Jesus. That's the blind. I was once blind, but now I see. When he made everything out of nothing, And I just like something out of nothing because it makes me think of me. I was nothing. I was lost. I didn't know where I was going. I was on the road to hell. I was groping around to find the way to go. My eyes were opened, and Jesus showed me the way.